What is good, ex-homies? It's your boy Jacob Gooden. We are back for part 3 of the I Kiss Dating Goodbye series. If you missed parts 1 and 2, go back, check those out. But we are talking about probably the worst Christian dating book on the market. Thank God it's no longer on the market. But yeah, I Kiss Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris. This is a terrible, terrible book. And today we're going to be covering part 3 of the book. So chapters 8 through 11. And yeah, it's going to be all kind of like his practical tools for how we keep pure and live a godly lifestyle in our romantic relationships. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So chapter 8 is titled Starting with a Clean Slate, the 4 important steps for getting on track with God's plan. And like most of Josh's chapters, it starts off with a story. And Josh tells a story of going to a birthday party for one of his buddies, and as a part of his birthday, so it's all boys invited to this party, and their dads are asked to come along with them. And their dads are also asked to bring along a tool that they use on the regular and a life lesson that goes along with it. And so they sit around, and these dads bring these different tools. One of them brings him a really nice pen and talks about the significance of the pen. Another dad brings him a nail puller and talks about the significance of the nail puller and how in life sometimes, you know, you got to pull a couple nails and kind of restart, so to speak, instead of just like continually hammering nails into, you know, the 2 pieces of wood you're trying to connect or something like that. And so anyway, kind of an interesting thing. It's setting up this whole like life lessons, building a godly lifestyle, the tools you're going to need for that segment of this book. And there was a couple things I just found so interesting about this. One was that it's a gender-specific birthday party. No girls were invited. No moms were invited to impart their wisdom. And 2, the thing that struck me was I went to a birthday party like this, and it kind of unlocked this memory for me of going to my friend's party, and I think he was turning 12 or 13, but kind of early manhood, adolescence was taking place, right? And it was a little bit different in that I don't remember all the dads bringing a tool to give to their sons, but I do remember the kid being given like a sword, like Lord of the Rings style, like broadsword kind of a thing. And there was a whole knighting ceremony. There was prayer that was involved with it. All these kind of things. The dad gave this long ass speech, talking about what it means to be a man and stand up and all these different things. And then it went around the room, and all of these fathers shared a piece of life advice with my friend. And on surface level, I don't want to say that this is like bad, okay? Like, I'm not trying to sit here and say like, oh, I don't think dads should give advice, because that's not true. It just felt like weird timing. You know, a birthday party is meant to be fun, games, cake, presents, like that kind of a thing. We sat there for probably 2 hours listening to these dudes spew off stuff. And if you know anything about dudes, and you know anything about dads specifically, a lot of times they have a lot of trouble getting right to the point and saying exactly what they mean. And so there's just a lot of rambling. And I remember as a kid just being like, how long do we have to sit through this? And even asking my dad, this is not something we're going to do when I turn 12 or 13, right? And I hope I didn't hurt his feelings when I said that. I hope it didn't make him feel bad, because maybe he didn't want to do that. But I wasn't into it. So anyway, just kind of a weird story to kick things off. So right after this, we get right into the 4 steps for getting on track with God's plan. And those 4 steps are: start with a clean slate, make your parents your teammates, establish protective boundaries, and check who's whispering in your ears. So right off the rip, we're getting right into it. Start with a clean slate. Josh says this in the book: if I want to live a godly lifestyle, we must first repent of sinful attitudes and behaviors in our relationships. The Bible uses the word repent to describe turning from what's wrong and pursuing what's right. Repentance is a change of direction based on a change of heart. Have you practiced selfishness in your relationships? If so, consider admitting your selfishness and correcting it. Have you played loose and careless in the area of purity? Then maybe you need to ask God to forgive you and seek ways to reverse your course. Are you currently involved in a relationship that you know is wrong for whatever reason? then ask God to give you the courage to do his will, which might include breaking off the relationship. Right off the rip, Josh is playing this sinful card. Again, if you didn't grow up in the Christian environment, this is something that is taught right from the beginning. I remember as a kid being single digits, being told this, like, we are sinful, we are evil. Without God, we can't do anything good, and we need him to be perfect, right? And I think it's kind of it's a very difficult thing now unpacking, where I'm just kind of like, it sets in your mind this, like, well, I'm just evil, I'm wicked, and so when sinful things happen, it's just my nature being my nature, and it never allows for the fact of, like, looking at how does the human body react to things, right? Especially when we come to those teenage years, those hormone years, right? Where things are changing. Adolescence has kicked in, right? And we are finding things sexually attractive. We are turned on inexplainably, that kind of a thing. And so Josh goes on to tell a story of a guy, Danny, who's like 18, and him and his girlfriend have been together for a couple months, and their relationship is almost purely physical. And Danny feels like he needs to break it off because even though they set up rules with each other and roadblocks and all of these things, their relationship inevitably turns back to being physical. And I find this really strange because I think, I can sit here and say, I think this needs to be a lesson of self-control. And that's coming from me now thinking that as humans, we're not inherently evil or wicked. But Christians, we use that as a cop-out to basically be like, well, I have no control over my body. And specifically, guys get told this a lot. We have no control over our bodies, and that's why the physicality of stuff kind of escalates a lot of times. That's why guys tend to be the ones who push the physical side of romantic relationships, right? And so, but instead of just like running away from it and being like, I need to break up with this girl and I need to break her heart and all of these things, like, why not actually like learn to have some self-control and learn to set up the correct kind of boundaries and get help where you need help, right? Maybe you need to have an older couple kind of walk you through some of the things you do, or maybe you do need to take a break, And I do want to say this too, like, if it's the physicality that made him uncomfortable and his partner was the one who was kind of pushing that on him, that's a totally different boundaries conversation. That's a totally different scenario, but like, that's not what we're being given. We're just being told, like, they're physical and in their relationship and they can't control themselves but be physical, so they should break up because obviously they're not ready to get married, okay? And I just think that it's kind of bullshitty. Jumping on to the next step along the path, we are looking at making parents your teammates. Here's what Josh has to say. You'll need two things as you live out a new attitude towards relationships: wisdom and accountability. Ideally, both of these should come from your parents. You need your mom and dad. I realize that not everyone has the opportunity to benefit from relationships with both their parents, but even so, I believe that you can gain valuable insights from whichever parent or guardian you most trust. Why do I say we need to gain wisdom and accountability from our parents? Because I can see how I shot myself in the foot by not trusting my parents in the past. When I was in high school, I hid my relationships from my parents. If I liked someone, I wouldn't let my parents know. I feared that if they got involved, they'd mess things up. What a mistake. By hiding my romantic life from my parents, I cut myself off from the God-given source of wisdom that could have saved me from making so many mistakes. I agree that I think having your parents or having trusted mentors, older figures in your life, being involved in your relationship, I think that can be really good, okay? But, one, I don't think it needs to happen immediately, okay? I also think that there is this it can fall into this overprotective parent scenario, right? Where you have this kind of like helicopter parent scenario and they're with you on all the dates and they have to be at everything and they have to know everything that's going on in your love life at all times, and nothing can be secret. And we'll see that more as we unpack more in the book. Josh talks more about privacy, or what he labels as privacy. And it's just an area that I think can get really muddy really quickly. And so he also goes on to talk about what qualifies someone to be like a proper mentor and the things that disqualify. He discounts divorced parents, non-Christian parents, and I think that also is a dangerous thing to play. Now, I know that Christians like to do this thing of like, don't really get wisdom from people who are not Christian because who knows? It could be bad advice, it could be from Satan, it could be whatever. But I think when you discount that, especially like a divorced parent scenario, like they've learned a lesson. There's a reason they're divorced. They weren't compatible. And there's something to be learned there, right? There's also something to be said for the fact that there's a lot of parents who stick together even though they probably shouldn't. So there's a lot of toxic traits to be learned from that, where you're putting up with things that you probably shouldn't be putting up with, to be quite honest. And so Josh's kind of solution to that, he talks about introducing other mentors from inside the church, right? Maybe it's a youth leader, maybe it's a pastor, it's some other mentor that can give wisdom, accountability regarding your relationships from a godly perspective. Here's again where I'm going to take some issue with that. How many youth leaders and youth pastors have groomed young girls and told them to wait to find the right guy, and as soon as that girl turns 18, they snap them up, right? And they love bomb them and, right, convince them that God has given them this message that they're supposed to be together, right? It's kind of weird. And in the same way, I also know some pastors who, would mentor relationships that were broken or young people who were single or whatever, and then they would inevitably have an affair with that person, which would dissolve their marriage and create like a gigantic church scandal. Like, and I understand there's going to be the argument of like, well, that's just human behavior. That's just, sinful human behavior. I get that. But why are we still continuing to push this idea that that's what you need in order to have a godly relationship, right? You need these mentor figures who are involved in your romantic relationship, who are speaking into it, who are telling you when to break up, who are giving you the playbook, so to speak. When we have this history inside of the church of that not working out, okay? Maybe we shake things up a little bit. Maybe we try a different pattern, okay? Let's jump into step 3, which is establish protective boundaries. Josh says this: after you've formed your team, you need to establish boundaries and guidelines for your relationship with the opposite sex. Sit down with your mom, your dad, your mentor, ask them questions such as what constitutes a romantic setting? What is going out with someone when is going out with someone appropriate, and when would it lead to premature intimacy? Think about some of the situations that might arise. What do you do when someone feels attracted to you, or vice versa? How much time should you spend on the phone with someone of the opposite sex? How much time should you have spent together, even in group settings? Setting boundaries like these will allow you to respond with confidence in different situations. And, okay, a few things here. I don't think that every piece of Josh's advice is completely god-awful. I think that it veers off into being really disgusting. But the overall idea of, like, establish protective boundaries around what you want a relationship to look like is valid, right? We all need that. What am I looking for in a relationship? What do I not want to do? How quickly do I want to move? All those things are okay, right? We can do those things. It's when we start getting into this, like, what constitutes a romantic scenario, and especially when we're talking about the purity culture realm, where, and we get into this in, I think it's in section 4, but he kind of has not the evolution, but the step-by-step of here's the phases you go through in a relationship. Casual friends to more serious friends to, like, a courting scenario, and then marriage. He really emphasizes this, like, your friends, and then you know that that's the person you want to marry, And so you marry them, and then like the intimacy begins, the romance begins, like almost at marriage. But like when you're limiting what romance is and you're limiting the time you can spend with somebody and not trusting yourself around the opposite sex, that's another issue. Not trusting yourself around the opposite sex, okay? I can't tell you the number of times I hung out with somebody of the opposite sex. It's literally just a friendship thing. It's literally just us getting coffee, going to the movies, having fun, doing something that's just friends, okay? And there's no stipulation of like this is a date or this isn't a date or this isn't romance. We read the room and we figured out what was going on. And what was going on was we were just being friends with each other, okay? We didn't need a third party there. Nothing bad was happening. We had self-control over our own bodies. We weren't jumping each other's bones in the car. Like we just inherently understood what was going on. And I think, again, this goes back, and I'm going to continue to put this on the guys specifically. We as men are not taught that, like, where those lines lie, right? We just, anytime we get horny, we view everything as this, like, sexual experience and this, like, we have this just utter desire for everything to be sexual almost. And it's really pathetic and disgusting. And we need to get out of that mindset and understand that there's a time and a place for that. And there's a way to communicate that that's what we're interested in pursuing with somebody. It's not all the time. It's not every place, okay? And it's not something that we should just expect that everybody is anticipating that we are romantically interested in them. I also wrote this down in my notes, and I wanted to share this. I said, I have come to the realization that I believe Josh left sexual sin ambiguous in this book to sell more copies. I think if he had truly spelled out exactly what he believed was right and wrong, this book would have been met with a ton of criticism. I mean, throughout the book and his follow-up book, Boy Meets Girl, he talks about what is appropriate for him, and he places himself on a pedestal above everyone else who chooses differently, right? We just read it in the book. What is right? What is wrong? How much time should he be spending with the opposite sex? He then goes on, for example, and he says, I have committed to avoiding situations that could lead to temptation. Being alone with a girl in an empty house is one such situation. So I've created a boundary about this issue. I will not go to a girl's house if no one else is there. If a girl calls me, invites me to come over, and mentions in passing that her parents aren't home, I don't have to weigh the situation or pray about it. I already know that I won't accept the invitation. Rules by themselves won't change our hearts, but once we've taken on a new attitude, protective boundaries can help keep the course. Again, boundaries are important. I understand. He doesn't want to go over to a girl's house. This is also written, like I said, from a 21-year-old man who, at 21, most people are in college or starting to move out. They don't live with their parents anymore. And so that gave it away to me that he wrote this for high school kids. He wrote this so that high school kids would feel this need to not be alone with the opposite sex. I have had experiences in my life. I also set boundaries like these things in my life for periods where I didn't always feel comfortable being alone with the opposite sex, alone at a house. I didn't maybe always feel comfortable. It was easier for me to be in public with them. We talked about last week the Billy Graham kind of mindset of like, you know, never let the door close if you're in an office with someone of the opposite sex because, you know, you just want there to be no question about it. And I think it kind of comes down to the fact that, like, if guys were actually taught self-control, if we were taught about understanding the appropriate time and place for things, that would never be an issue. There would never be a question. Bad stuff's still going to happen, of course. But, like, it would become less and less of an issue that those things would happen. Moving on. Last step, step 4, checking who's whispering in your ear. This is what Josh has to say about that. He says, finally, keep an eye on your influences. Who and what you listen to, read, and watch will encourage or conflict with our commitment to pursue God's best in relationships. He goes on to talk about some girls in his church who always feel like dissatisfied after watching romantic movies. It makes me wonder, why doesn't that happen to me? Does anything in your life cause that kind of discontentment? If so, then maybe you need to consider cutting out some things. Maybe you need to stop reading romance novels, watching soap operas, because they encourage ungodly longings within you. Perhaps you need to turn off the radio because much of today's music exalts a false definition of love. You might need to tune out some of your favorite TV shows because they mock your beliefs about purity. Whatever tempts you towards discontentment or compromise, don't put up with it, tune it out, turn it off. Here we go again. Josh criticizing the media, he's criticizing pop culture and the things that people consume. He's claiming that, again, it paints this unrealistic picture, expectations of love and romance, and he's doing the classic Christian culture war argument that they love so much, right? The media is bad. They are promoting bad things, and we should steer clear of that. That's why we have people who argue today that, like, Disney's gone woke, right? Or they don't allow their kids to watch, like, the Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, things like that. I'm going to get into that in a soon-to-come episode about the things we weren't allowed to do as homeschoolers. But, like, that's part of the reason that certain things are hindered from people. And it's not always the reason, but a lot of it is. Something that I learned, I want to say maybe around 18-ish, was learning to differentiate between reality and fantasy. And this came about a couple different ways. One, I mean, I grew up reading a lot of fantasy novels, a lot of fiction, and that's pretty cut and dry. That's make-believe, right? We don't believe these things actually happened, but it makes for a good story, right? It doesn't leave me discontented because I know I don't have the magical powers of somebody in the Chronicles of Narnia, right? I don't believe that, I can travel across the galaxy in a spaceship and, go a million parsecs and go to visit this new planet with all these new aliens and, whatever. I just don't believe. That's fantasy. That's made up. And then we have the stuff that maybe is a fiction book, but it's written in a way that can convey some more seriousness to it. And I talk a lot about the Da Vinci Code and reading that book with my dad. And one of the reasons I always go back to that example was the fact that for a lot of people, that book was an instant no, because they heard someone talk about it and how it was bad and how it portrayed Christianity in this negative light and it told lies and it was coming for your faith. When you open the book, the first little synopsis thing in the book literally says this is a work of fiction, historical fiction, and while a lot of the elements are pulled from real stories, real historical evidenced things, it's make-believe. They've been twisted, they've been altered, right? It's like National Treasure. No one thinks that there's a treasure map on the back of the Declaration of Independence, right? We pretty much all know that's fake. And so, learning to differentiate between the reality and the fantasy has helped me a lot because it's helped me in consuming a lot of media because I know when I can turn that on and turn that off. And that's a skill that I think a lot of people need to start working on in their lives of where does that line lie for you and what is, convincing you of something that is not actually happening, but you're taking it to be real. And again, I see that in Josh's argument here. Who's whispering in your ear? He goes after media, right? He goes after the movies you watch, the books you're consuming, right? Especially like the romance genre of stuff. Romance is super spicy right now. I just read my first spicy book this summer, and spoiler alert, it wasn't that spicy, but there was elements to it that I was like, okay, yeah, this is a fun fantasy. This is a fun fake reality, but that's what it is. I can't do everything that's in that book. A partner can't do everything that's in that book. It's fantasy. It's make-believe. That's okay. But it's a lot of fun still. And that's, I think, where Christians get it wrong, is they act like the media is portraying everything as reality, when it's not. A lot of it is just fantasy. Okay? Let's move on. Chapter 9, it's called Just Friends in a Just Do It World. It's keeping relationships out of the romance zone. I'm going to read this first section of this chapter. Again, he kind of tells a story, or it's a scenario, and I think it just helps kind of paint the picture for what this chapter is going to be about. So he says this. He says, you meet someone of the opposite sex. He or she really catches your eye. Uh-oh. Then you get to know this person, and you find out he or she has a great personality as well. Double uh-oh. To top it all off, this person sends you that I'd like to get to know you better vibe. Major uh-oh. If you've decided to put romance on hold until you're ready for marriage, what do you do in a situation like this? If you're not going to play the dating game, what's the plan? The simple answer is to just be friends. Easy, right? Not quite. Maybe we wouldn't struggle with the scenario if God created us without hearts, devoid of emotions and immune to attraction. But he didn't. Most of us have to deal with all three as we stumble through the confusing process of finding balance between two extreme options, jumping headlong into romance with everyone who catches our eye, or running in fear from all members of the opposite sex. Finding that balance is anything but easy. The middle ground can often feel more like a tightrope stretched over a gaping chasm. I put down in my notes, I said, uh-oh, I found you attractive and now I'm sinning. I said, good Lord, Josh. He just doesn't want people to feel any type of way. He's denying the reality that the human body creates hormones and has emotional responses to people we find attractive. I'm going to take back a little bit of that statement and say, I think he does recognize that. But again, I think he's pushing people to kind of, the wording of his books lends themselves to needing to be this perfect thing, this person who's kind of devoid of romantic feelings and romantic attraction and all of those things until they're ready to get married, flip a switch, turn those things on, find a partner, get married very quickly, and then in marriage, flip the switch of sex is good. And that's just not how things work, unfortunately. That's just not how the human body operates. It's not how our minds work, all that kind of stuff. Hey, I went on to say, even with my friends, I sometimes find myself thinking about them and wanting to spend time with them, fantasizing about the next time we're together. That's normal for humans to do. We're allowed to feel. It's chemical. And now I don't mean that I find my friends romantically attractive, although I do have some attractive friends, much more attractive than me. But what I mean is it's very normal as a human being to get to know somebody, to meet somebody, and want to spend time with them. That's what we do. We're creatures of connection, right? We need that. We long for that. That's something that is just part of our DNA is community. We need that. When we live in isolations, we can't be our truest, fullest, most fulfilled person, right? COVID should have taught us that at this point. The next kind of bulleted section in this chapter is called Just Plain Confusing. And he goes on kind of this statement of being just friends is plain confusing. In all honesty, I haven't completely figured it out. Okay. And he goes on and he talks about the Tootsie Pop ad, right? Everyone knows this, right? How many licks? It's the kid with the owl. How many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop, right? He licks once, he counts 1, right? He licks again, 2, licks again, 3, licks a 4th time, he crunches down on it, skips the whole line. We never know how many licks it actually takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. So he goes on to say this after that. When I consider my friendship with girls, I feel like that boy, the one from the ad, right, who wants to know how many licks to get to the center. I don't want to reach the chewy center of romance. I just want to be friends. But I don't know how much attention a friendship between a guy and a girl can handle before crunch. We've crossed the line from friendship into more than friendship. I put this in my notes. I said, Josh seems to turn every interaction with girls into a sexual situation. We just talked about this. I think that's a him problem. Like, dude, chill out. And again, every time he talks about someone of the opposite sex, because again, we're talking in a very heterosexual space, right? Christianity, heterosexual space. One man, one woman, no room for anything else. Every interaction that Josh has with a girl has this grain of sexual tension to it, right? Will they, won't they? I find them attractive. Should we kiss? All those types of things. Is this the person I'm meant to be with? And you see later on, even like the way he views his quote unquote friendships with girls, when they start to pair off, there's jealousy involved for him. And again, we talked about it. It's okay to be friends with someone of the opposite sex. It just is. I have plenty of friends. You've met a lot of them on the show. Friends of mine who are of the opposite sex. They're beautiful young women, and I love them dearly. But am I romantically attracted to them? No. They're just my friends. We have a great time when we're together. We go get a beer. We go to the movies. We go mini golfing. We go rollerblading. We have fun. We do fun adult friend things. But there's nothing sexual there. Because you can have that. Not every scenario with someone of the opposite sex has to be sexual. And that's something we need to start teaching our young people. Not every interaction with someone of the opposite sex is sexual. We need to not be sitting there wondering, do they like me? Do they not like me? Is this a romantic thing? Is this not a romantic thing? Okay? We have to get over that. We have to get over that hump. I'm going to jump forward just a little bit. There's a lot of things I could continue to unpack in that last section, but I feel like I'd be going in circles, right? It's kind of all pointing back to the same thing of guys and girls can have friendships. It's okay. But let's jump into this next section, which is understanding the difference between friendship and intimacy. Okay, Josh has this to say about this. He goes, we can more clearly see the elusive line between friendship and more than friendship when we understand the difference between friendship and intimacy. Friendship is about something other than two people in the relationship. Intimacy is about each other. In a true friendship, something outside the two friends brings them together. C.S. Lewis wrote this. We picture lovers face to face, but friends side by side. Their eyes look ahead. The key to friendship is a common goal or objective on which both companions focus. It can be an athletic pursuit, a hobby, faith, music, but it's something outside of themselves. As soon as those two people involve focus on the relationship, it has moved beyond friendship. I think it's really weird. I think Josh's definition of intimacy is wrong. Because if you look up the Webster definition of intimacy, intimacy is a close familiarity or friendship. It's a closeness with somebody, okay? And so my understanding of intimacy has always been that there are different types of intimacy. There's friendship, there's romantic, there's a parental intimacy. There's all these different things, and so I think it's I think we need to re-examine what Josh is trying to say here, right? A friendship has this component of you guys looking to something else, right? Whether it's a hobby, whatever it is. You can also have friendships that are about each other, and that you don't share passions, that you don't, you can just be friends. You know what I mean? And so, but I think about, my relationships with people, right? And I think about my dear friends and how I would tell them anything. Anything they want to know, my deepest, darkest secrets, they ask, they're theirs to have. And, that is a very deep level of intimacy. It's a closeness with that person where I feel comfortable, right? It's a comfort thing with them. With my parents, there's a lot of things that I'll share with them. There's a lot of, we have this bond because they've been there my entire life, right? They've seen me grow up. They know me probably better than most people know me. And, so we have this closeness. We have an intimacy. Now, my wife and I, we also have an intimacy, not only as friends and the closeness that comes with that, but also romantic, right, in nature. And so there's different ways to look about it, but I think just lumping the word intimacy into sex and into romance is a bad game to play, because, again, we talked about, or I mentioned how purity culture and the Christian culture I grew up in, there was a lot of things, there was a lot of media and a lot of books that were kind of these like instant no-nos. And it's interesting because even still, I'll pick up a book and I'll read the back, right? Or I'll flip through a couple pages of it and I'll see buzzwords that I go, that's associated with this, right? And I remember picking up this book. I'm totally spacing on what the book was titled, but it was about building intimate relationships. And I picked it up being like, okay, interesting, romance book. Here we go, relationship. We're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about romance. That's what this book's about. No, this book had nothing to do with that. This book had everything to do with building closeness with people, right? Setting correct boundaries, understanding, this person kind of fulfills this need in my life and I share this with them, the levels of intimacy and how you get to that, right? How you build that trust with people, all those types of things. And so as I flipped through it, I was like, this is really interesting. This is a different way to view this. And so, again, I think we just need to take certain words and redefine them, or look at maybe actually define them and take out the Christian definition that people like Josh continue to put on these things, right? That maybe we don't agree with, and actually look at what they truly do mean, okay? I had this in my notes too that I wanted to share, was that I have not always been uber close with every friend, even the people that sometimes I would label my best friends. And I was thinking, as I've been prepping and rereading this book, and because even though I read it and I took all these notes, like, it's been a little while, so I'm kind of rereading it as we're going through it. But I had this thought, and I was thinking about holding certain people at arm's length growing up. And as I've unpacked my religion, I've really started to realize that a lot of my youth leaders and a lot of my friends who were Christians, I held them at this arm's length because I didn't have the closeness with them to always share all of the things that I believed were sinful in my life, right? Or the degree to which I was struggling with them. And the reason I didn't do that was because, especially with the leaders, I was looking for someone who was going to help guide me and point me in kind of a direction of like, here's the steps to take to get better. So I'm going to use porn as an example, okay? I grew up believing porn was sinful, it was wrong, it was evil. But I never wanted to talk about it with my youth leaders because at youth group, whenever it would come up, of course, every teenage boy, for the most part, was struggling with looking at porn. We were struggling with that. Or we were, quote unquote, struggling with it. But if I went to them and said, I have this problem where I'm looking at it 4 times a day, I can't turn it off. It's all I think about. I close my eyes and I see it, right? I do believe personally I probably had a low degree of addiction to this at different points in my life. But I was looking for steps to get out of that, okay? And so even when I would bring it up kind of subtly to test the waters of like, oh yeah, like I've just been kind of wrestling with this, or I essentially I was being like, I want to get clean, right? I want to get sober from that. It was always met with pray more, worship more, serve more. Now, those are definitely things that you can do. However, they're not steps to actually break the addiction, right? And I was maybe looking for something that was like, here's the 7 steps, right? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put this protection on your computer. We're going to have you text so-and-so at this time. And so because I didn't get, when I would test the waters, I didn't get maybe the steps I felt like necessary to take some movement forward in my struggle, I wouldn't trust him with any more because I was like, you gave me bad advice. You gave me advice that's not working. I can pray a whole bunch, but then I just feel really guilty. I can serve in church and feel like, okay, I'm paying penance for what I'm doing. But like, I actual practical advice and step-by-step things that were going to get me to where I wanted to be, and I wasn't getting that. So I didn't build an intimate connection with any of those people because we couldn't have that closeness because there wasn't a trust there. Because I was continually worried that if I did tell them, I was going to just, again, be told, here's what you do, and then I was going to be watched like a hawk and constantly told, like, hey, did you look at porn today? Hey, did you do this today? Hey, did you do that today? But I was never going to be given the tools, so I was going to continue to fail, but then I was going to be made to feel bad about it the entire time. Okay? Does that make sense? Moving on. Next section. Being inclusive, not exclusive. So, we're jumping to page 130, and this is what Josh has to say. The second step in being just friends with the opposite sex is to include others instead of isolating ourselves with just one person. We don't want dating's mindset of being alone to carry into our friendships. We can avoid this by going out of our way to involve friends, family, and maybe even strangers in our lives. Kind of a weird take, but okay. This is, again, so weird. We kind of talked about this already. This whole idea of, like, just don't be alone with someone of the opposite sex. And what does even alone mean, right? Like, if I go out with a friend of the opposite sex and we go to dinner, we're not technically alone. There's other people there, right? In the Christian worldview, that would be like a date, right? I don't know if I've told this story on the show before. I know I've brought it up with friends before, but when I was in high school, I was friends with a lot of people, and there was a couple of girls that lived in this one part of town, and I would go hang out with them, and we would inevitably end up at Starbucks. And usually I would hang out with them solo. We would just go do something fun, and it wasn't a big deal. My parents were cool with it. Their parents were cool with it. And for whatever reason, we would end up at this Starbucks. And there was a homeschool mom who continually ran into me at this Starbucks with all of these different girls and made comments about the fact that she thought that I was seeing all of them and being a player. Now, like, I get it. Like, actually, no, I don't get it. I was wanting to feel bad there for a second for this person. Without asking us anything about what we're doing, why we're hanging out, nothing. She assumed that I was romantically entangled with all of these people and that I was, like, basically going behind every one of their backs to date somebody else, right? And so I had all of these girls all at my fingertips, to my playthings, so to speak. And, like, that was hurtful when that came out, that, like, she was accusing me of that, because that's not how my friends felt. That's not how I felt about the situation. And it made me really self-conscious about where I go and how I conduct myself and all of these things. And I didn't feel like I could be around her daughters at all. And I didn't feel like I could be around those girls for a little while without having a conversation and setting this expectation, right, of, like, we're just friends, right? Like, we're just this. I think that's what's so harmful about, like, this book and this idea of, like, we can be nothing more than friends until we're certain that we are meant to be together. And it played into this, like, idea that, like, we're like siblings. That's like, romance is like a no-no. And it never let anything evolve naturally, because even if one of us was feeling a romantic inkling towards the other person, why would you ever say it? Because the other person is probably going to say, no, but, like, we're just friends, right? They're going to shoot you down. And so it led to a lot of the homeschool group just not dating, right? We didn't date each other. We for sure didn't have sex, but, like, there was no romantic anything amongst any of us, even though maybe internally we felt that way, but we couldn't, because it would be crossing this line and sinning, right? And that was a big no-no. So I just think, I don't know, I just hated this idea, and it got continually pushed by, if anyone ever watched, like, the Duggar Family, I don't remember what their show was called, it was like 18 and Counting or something like that, but, like, their kids would go on dates and they would have chaperones, which were usually the siblings, and they would, do all these different, it's just weird. It was just weird. And that was the reality of what I grew up inside of these people who, even if my parents had said, well, dating looks like this and this is acceptable and this is okay and you can do these things, there were other people in the homeschool group who would have frowned upon that, right? So I want to move on. I get a lot to cover. We're only like halfway done. Let's look at this next part, which is seek opportunities to serve, not to be entertained. And he goes on, he says, the late Kurt Cobain captured the attitude of today's culture with the line, "Here we are now, entertain us." I believe that unfortunately many Christians have made Cobain's line the refrain of their friendships. In my opinion, our cultural obsession with entertainment is really just an expression of selfishness. The focus of entertainment is not producing something useful for the benefit of others, but consuming something for the pleasure of self. Number one thing, just got to point this out in the book. They spelled Kurt Cobain's name wrong. Spelled it with a C instead of a K. So it's Kurt with a C. Yeah, so whoever also edited this book, you messed up. Obviously, they were not enjoying today's entertainment. But here's what I wrote down about this. Christians really get caught up in the servant attitude and forget about the self. Even Jesus took time for himself, right? He went out in the wilderness for 40 days, but we're not allowed. We must always be giving, be serving, be stacking chairs, be worshiping, be serving on the worship team, teaching Bible study or Sunday school. I understand that we can get to know people better by doing something constructive, but I was never taught the part about being selfish for a second. As I got older and I burned out in college or church, it was because of this reason. I was always looking for opportunities to serve other people, right? I worked at a church where I would get up at fucking 5 a.m. in the morning on Sundays. I'd go set this thing up and stack chairs and be on the worship team and run sound and do all of these things that were just like insane behavior for a college kid to be doing. And I did that every week for like 6 months. And in addition to that, I was part of Bible studies. I went to other chapel services. I did all of these other things. I looked for any opportunity to serve, to give of myself. And I burned out because you have to take time for yourself, regardless of if you're Christian or not. Like, regardless of if you want, I still love to serve people. I do. Like, that's what I love to do. That's what I do for the clients I work with. That's what I do with some of you guys, even like the connections that I can build with people and connecting the dots and putting you guys in scenarios with other people, hopefully, or helping you with something or whatever. Like, I love to do those things because that's a part of who I am. I love the opportunity to serve. That's what this podcast is meant to do. It's meant to be of service to you guys, right? To talk about things, to share stories. There's a selfish component to it, but it's selfish in the sense that I also really like to do that. I just do, right? And so I get a kick out of it. But I've learned as time has gone on to be selfish, that it's okay to take a day where I just do what I want, where I just chill, where I relax, where I eat the thing I want to eat, and I play the video game I want to play, and I read the book I want to read, and I don't worry about anybody else because I've already given so much of myself to other people, and I just need a minute to refuel, right? We're not taught that at church. I wasn't taught that at church. If you were, congratulations, awesome. But if you weren't taught that in church, please remember to do that, okay? Because otherwise you become a shell of the person who you really are. We need time to fill the tank back up. We need that time. Take that time. It's okay. Call it selfish, but you need it. It's okay to be selfish sometimes. The last piece of this chapter that I want to talk on is this section called Brotherly Love. He has this quote in here, and he says, what's our relationship with each other? We're brothers and sisters in Christ. How do we view and treat each other with honor? And what's the secret of our zeal? Service side by side for God's glory. I wrote this in my notes. I said, the brother-sister thing really threw me off for a really long time, okay? Again, I talked about growing up in the homeschool community we were all told for so long, these are like your brothers and your sisters, and we would go to each other's houses all the time, and we would, sleepovers, and we were with these people a lot. And so they became those things to us. It's also really weird to have romantic feelings about your brothers and sisters. Just gonna put that out there. And so we were primed not to be romantic with each other, right? Because that's weird. That's like incest, right? It's just weird. And so if you look at the homeschool group I grew up in, there's not that many homeschoolers who married homeschoolers that we knew. There's just not. So even if you did marry a homeschooler, a lot of times it's from some other group or some other, scenario where there wasn't the closeness, there wasn't the sibling attitude. But for the rest of us, we all still look at each other. I mean, maybe I'm gonna speak for myself, but we look at each other and it's like, that's my sibling, right? We went on vacation together. We did this thing together. We, whatever. And so there was never space for there to be anything of romance. And so if you had a crush, no. And I think about the experiences I had with prom and this constant needing. I mean, the first prom I went to, I was the one invited, but was very clear on the phone, but we're just going as friends. It's like, well, yeah, for sure. The next year, when it was my senior prom and I invited my date, I called Julia and I remember being like, but just friends. And there needing to be this stipulation of us just being friends because we're not romantic. And again, that media playing a role in, well, when you go to prom with somebody, there's this expectation of you're going to kiss or you're going to hook up or something like that. Is playing this role, again, fantasy, reality, right, type of thing. And one of the things about this whole scenario of the brother-sister love fiasco, I'm just going to call it, but this kind of not allowing us to have romantic feelings towards each other, is that when I got to college, it made me really awkward at dating because I'd never done it before. It was my first time. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it would have been nice to go into it having had my heart broken a few times, right? Having just maybe a little experience under my belt, of anything, of knowing what the pain felt like when it didn't work out. I think that those little pieces like that would have been helpful. And so I wanted to also put this in here that said, stop teaching kids that their bodies are being sinful by having natural reactions to things. Penis havers get boners. Vagina owners get wet. It's normal. Your body is reacting. And I wrote that because as I thought about these feelings that we had growing up and how we were siblings, we were denied our natural reactions to things, right? It was never put in the correct context of what we were feeling. And so there was a lack of sex ed. There was a lack of us talking about these things. And if your parents talk to you about these things, kudos to your parents. But it felt awkward and weird. Again, all of these buzzwords, intimacy, romance, kissing, all of these things were bad. They were negatives in our life because you were not supposed to do them. They are saved for marriage. That is what Josh Harris is telling you throughout this whole book. All of these things are saved until marriage. They're saved until marriage. They're saved until marriage. And when you're telling a kid that, you're telling them to go against the natural urges that their bodies are having. And I'm not saying, that's not to say that we should just let high schoolers and young adults just do whatever they want. And, that's also a recipe for disaster. But what I'm saying is that we have to start having these conversations. We have to start talking about these things. Why is your body reacting this way? Why are you feeling this way when you see that person? Why? Asking those questions and being okay with the awkward conversations, right? Being okay with talking about these things. Being okay saying it is perfectly normal for your body to be reacting that way. Now, what are we going to do with that, right? That's where, it all connects to each other, right? I talked about guys not understanding the correct context for sexual situations. We need to be having those conversations with people. What is the context of this scenario? Do we need to be doing that? No. Okay, when is the appropriate time to do that? Here's the appropriate time. Those types of things. And so we set these young adults We set these young people up for success when it comes to their body and understanding and listening to their body, as opposed to continually denying themselves and ending up like somebody like me who still wrestles with understanding that my body tells me things, right? My body tells me when it's tired and I need to listen. It tells me when something feels good and I need to not feel ashamed for that. It tells me when I'm hungry. It tells me all of the things I need to live. I have denied myself that for so long. I'm 28 fucking years old. I'm about to be 29. By the time this comes out, I'm probably 29, okay? 29 years old. I still don't get it always, okay? These things have lasting impacts. These things that Josh is talking about, the concepts and the way that he words it, and it's ambiguous and it's not clear, right? It creates this distrust in your body. It creates this like icky feeling that we're dealing with a decade away from learning these things, from having these things implanted in our minds, okay? This is not just a flip the switch kind of scenario. These are things that last for a long, long time and take a lot of work, a lot of effort to get over them. All right, we got to move on because I've been rolling for way too long. Chapter 10, guard your heart, okay? Main theme on this one. Fighting off lust, infatuation, self-pity. Here's how this chapter starts. Emily sprawled lazily on the bed as she watched Jessica pack. I bet I know what'll happen when you get to school, she said suddenly. Oh, really? Jessica replied distractedly. She was more concerned now with how to organize the mess of clothing, shoes, and makeup that covered her bedroom floor. Yeah, really, Emily said as she threw a pair of socks at Jessica. She could tell when she wasn't being taken seriously. You're going to get there, meet some guy, and fall in love. Then you'll have to crawl back on your knees and beg me to forgive you for all the hassle you've given me about dating. Oh, I can't wait until you have a boyfriend. If anyone besides Emily had said this to Jessica, she would have been angry. But coming from her best friend, infuriating though it was, Jessica had to smile. Emily, I've told you before that it's not a matter of not wanting to fall in love, Jessica said as she crammed another pair of jeans in the suitcase. I'm just not interested in playing games and chasing after pointless relationships like some people I know. Wink. That was a terrible wink on my part. If you're listening to audio, be thankful you didn't see that. So, again, this chapter, we're talking lust. We're talking infatuation. Right off the rip, we're still with this rhetoric of pointless dating, pointless relationships, right? Like, there is no value in dating, right? There is no value in it because it's just setting you up for failure after failure after failure. There is value in friendship. There is value in building relationships with people, romantic and not, okay? There's value in that. They might not all pan out, but saying that they're pointless is just kind of dumb. And, I would hope that at this point, Josh Harris kind of understands that. He talks about in these books multiple times how he had a lot of girlfriends before he swore off dating and he kissed it goodbye. And then he had one more relationship that he married. And unfortunately, they're no longer together. But I find it really interesting, and I would love to ask him personally, what did you gain out of the relationships that you had before the woman that you married? Because I'm sure that there's life lessons that he learned. Now, I understand there's an imparting of wisdom, right? That's where we go back to the mentor thing. We go back to having parents involved. We go back to older siblings being involved in our romantic relationships. Of course, they can help steer us in the right direction and tell us this is worth it, this is not worth it, they're not a good for you, right? We need those things in our life sometimes. However, it's also very human nature that we just sometimes have to learn it on our own, right? We got to break some eggshells to make an omelet, kind of a thing. So let's keep moving on, right, into the next section of this book, when the rules don't fit the game, okay? Now, we're still talking about Jessica and not so much Emily, because Emily was the friend, but Jessica is now at college, and she gets there and has what she calls her rules of romance. Like modern day Moses descending from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, she felt sure that her list of do's and don'ts would solve the world's relational problems, or at least keep her from experiencing them. First, Jessica wouldn't allow herself to get bogged down in short term relationships. Until she felt she could pursue marriage, dating was out. She would only go out with guys in groups. At the point when romance was appropriate, a guy who showed interest in her would first talk with her parents. From this point, Jessica had every detail of the courtship process planned, like a carefully written screenplay. After checking out the prospective suitor, mom and dad would give the young man permission to woo her, and the two of them would fall hopelessly in love, and the sun would shine on their outdoor wedding. So Jessica wants to wait until she's ready for marriage before dating and sets all these rules in place. Okay. Setting up rules for your relationship might not seem like the worst idea, but it puts a lot of pressure and a timeline on stuff. And if you've ever watched Summer House, we know that timelines are bad and they fall through. Okay. If you don't get that reference, watch Summer House. Okay. The second thing that I find so interesting about this, and this is going to come up again and again and again, asking for parents' permission to date the daughter. I've always found this kind of stupid, and I don't know. This is kind of a debate. I mean, tell me in the comments, I guess, like, let me know, like, do you want your parents' approval to date somebody? Do you want them to go? I don't know. But here's why I find it personally stupid. I knew a girl in college who that was one of her deals. You wanted to date her, you had to call her dad, you had to convince him why you were a good guy to date his daughter. I straight up to her face was like, that's stupid. And if I ever asked you out, I would not be asking your dad. And she was like really taken aback by that. And she's like, why? And I was like, well, I think you should be trusted to make your own decisions. And I told her, I was like, I understand maybe asking parents' permission when it comes to marriage. Even that I still kind of find weird. I did that technically. My mother-in-law was like, why are you even asking me? But like this kind of like sheltering again of specifically women, but that sheltering is kind of again reinforcing this idea of like we can't trust ourselves, we can't trust our body, we can't trust what it's telling us, right? And so I just find that such like it's just it's a bad rule in my opinion. Like again, you are your own person, you have agency over your body, make your own decisions. If you want to go out with me, great. If you don't, that's fine too. Like, I'm not going to be butthurt over it. You know what I mean? But me having to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop to like get you to go out with me is like not attractive, right? It makes you, this is going to come off sounding like just pathetic manosphere shit, but like it makes you unattractive to me as a man because I don't see you as somebody who is independent and can think for themselves, and that's attractive to me. And so it's my own opinion. That's my own, what I'm attracted to. But, it is what it is. Okay, let's move on. Next up, the deceitful heart is this next section. Oof, God. Josh says this: the human heart doesn't like taking orders from the mind. The time will come for all of us when we don't feel like doing the godly, responsible thing we've resolved to do. The question is, how will we respond when our hearts lead a full-scale rebellion? If we don't prepare ourselves for an uprising, you'll feel tempted to abandon our principles and standards. Okay, here we go again with the wicked, deceitful, ugly, reprehensible heart, right? The core of any good Christian argument. We are so inherently wicked that we need Jesus because we can't be trusted to do anything right because our own evilness gets in the way. We must wait. I was a little heated when I wrote this, but this is what I wrote in my notes. We must wait for Daddy God to show us the way. Like, grow up, people. We can make decisions on our own. And it all ties back to purity culture, because how can we be trusted to date when we can't even be trusted to be a good person? that again ties back into daughters being like, you have to get my dad's permission. They don't trust themselves, right? And but never have I ever heard a guy tell a girl, well, you have to call my parents and ask if you can ask me out. Never have we seen that. I have this additional note that I kind of put in asterisks because it pertains to everything we're talking about, but it says this: I genuinely think that purity culture was pushed solely as a way to control kids from dating, relieving parents from having to have the sex talk or relationship talks with their kids. It set such a high expectation that it was impossible to accomplish, right? We lived in shame and doubt and fear that we were going to get it wrong, so we would never participate in it. That's the reality of what it felt like. All of us were being pushed to not do this thing because if we messed it up, it would be not only detrimental to ourselves, but detrimental to another person or other people. Like crazy. Okay, we got to keep going. We got to keep moving. The cheating boss. Oh my God, this story was insane. So he tells this story in the book of Julie, who's a 19-year-old. She gets a job as a receptionist, and she finds her boss attractive. She's attracted to him. He also shows some attraction to her, and he is married. I believe it says he has kids or whatever. But yeah, he's in a fully committed relationship, and he puts the moves on her. And so she is like convicted, leaves her job, kind of a thing. What I find crazy is he goes on in the story to talk about Jessica confessing her sins for finding a married man attractive. And I was like, is that a sin? Like, is it? I would never have thought of it that way, right? Like, I look at people all the time and I go, that's an attractive person. I don't act on it, but I can see somebody and go, that's an attractive person. I don't think that that's wrong, right? I don't think that that's sinful behavior. Even when I was a Christian, I didn't think that that was sinful behavior to just find somebody attractive. So I find it crazy that he's talking about this girl needing to confess her sin of finding her boss attractive when she did nothing wrong. Her boss is the one who instigated an inappropriate relationship with her. And so her reaction is to say no. She says no, she leaves, she quits her job. Who's in the wrong here? It's not her. She has nothing to apologize for. Like, what are we talking about? Yeah, crazy shit, okay? This all plays into this narrative, again, that, like, women carry so much more of the burden of purity than men do, or men ever will, I guess. Like, it's this just kind of like, like I don't like. I'm sure we're gonna get into clothes at some point in here, but like, it again is this like, why is it only their responsibility, and the men have no responsibility, right? We are continually told uncontrollable hormone monsters, sex drives crazy, all of these things. Do nothing about it. It's the woman's job to dress modestly, to basically put us in our place. It's fucking bullshit, people. It's fucking bullshit. All right, gotta keep moving. Gotta keep moving. All right, here we go. The pure springs. So Josh then goes on to tell this proverb, and he talks about this story of a quiet forest dweller who once lived high above an Austrian village along the eastern slopes of the Alps. Wow. And this guy had one job, and it was to come down into this village and into the surrounding area, and he would clean these pools. He would clean these, just natural springs, kind of a deal. And that was his one job, and he was paid to do that. Now, the city council gets together, and they decide that, hey, there's this guy. He just comes down, and his job is to maintain the springs. Why is he doing that? It's a waste of our money, right? And so they do away with it. And a few days later, the water's like all nasty, right? It's got like foam on it. It's like disgusting. And he says in the end, right, they they enjoyed this thing, and then they basically like voted against their own interest in getting rid of this guy. And he said, we make the same mistake in our own lives. Like the keeper of the spring who maintained the purity of the water, you and I are the keepers of our hearts. We need to constantly evaluate the purity of our hearts in prayer, asking God to reveal the little things that contaminate us. As God reveals our wrong attitudes, longings, and desires, we must remove them from our hearts. The constant evaluation of like our hearts and needing to check the purity is like exhausting. Okay, it's part of what like led to me burning out. Like in addition to servitude, it's this constant like, am I sinning? It's just this constant checking of like, am I doing wrong? Am I doing wrong? Am I doing wrong? Am I doing wrong? And living in this perpetual fear of like, I am doing something wrong and that God is going to be angry at me for it. I can't tell you the number of times I've like cried on the mats at church. Like we had these carpets in the front and you could go kneel before God. And I've cried and I've sobbed and I've been like, I'm just a wicked, evil person because like I did this thing. And if you believe in Christianity, I understand there sometimes needs to be repentance of sin within that religion. But what I don't understand is that Christianity teaches that we are given this gift of forgiveness, right? Man fell short. We couldn't cut it. God had to send his one and only son to come and pay the ultimate price, which was death on a cross. And if we believe that and we ask him to come live inside of us, we're forgiven. And the Holy Spirit comes and lives inside of us and makes us better people. And statements and stories like this, right, that end with this kind of telling of this, like you have to constantly be evaluating your heart and are you doing something wrong? I think it diminishes the power of what Christians believe God is, what God did for them. Because if he forgives you, he forgives you. That's it, right? He knows that you're going to mess up. And I don't know that there's a necessity to constantly be living in this state of, I am wicked, I am evil, I am all these things. When you accept that gift, doesn't that transform you then into a new person? Just something to think about. Next up in this book is the pollutants of the heart, okay? And there's three of them. There's infatuation, there's lust, and there's self-pity, okay? We're going to rip through them real quickly. Anytime we allow someone to displace God as the focus of our affection, we've moved from innocent appreciation of someone's beauty or personality to the dangerous realm of infatuation. Instead of making God the object of our longing, we wrongly direct those feelings towards another human. We become idolaters, bowing to someone other than God, hoping that this person will meet our needs and bring fulfillment. Here's what I wrote. Again, with the possibility of knocking God off their pedestal for infatuation with a person. Like, is it not normal to think about someone we find attractive? Is it not normal for our minds to flash to positive memories of that person? This book seems to indicate that God must always be top of mind. Earlier in the book, Josh talked about the couples that only wanted to spend time with each other, and they wanted to shirk the responsibilities of their lives. It seems like he wants to shirk the responsibilities of his life to only hang out with God. I know that some people are going to be like, but there's nothing better than God. Like, there's nothing better. If I could just spend all my time with God, I just would. That's not the reality of life, right? But also, if you believe that God put us here for a reason and purpose, look at what that purpose should be, okay? As someone who, for a long time, was a Christian, I kind of believed my purpose was to do what Jesus did, right? It was to live in community with people, to have fun, to mourn together, to live life together. That was like my purpose on this earth. And I felt like through doing those things with people, I would exhibit godlike behavior and it would open possibilities to have conversion talks with people. But I'll tell you what's not attractive to a lot of people who aren't Christians. Somebody who only ever fucking talks about God. It's boring. It's not interesting. It's like, and if you have any preconceived notion about Christianity, it's not going to be attractive. It feels very much like when you have the Jehovah's Witnesses come knock on your door and everybody groans and they go, oh, these guys again. Like, I don't want to listen to this spiel.
That's how it feels when somebody makes their whole entire personality about God. And it's just, that's all they want to talk about. It's all they want to do. It's all their Instagram is good for, is these weird, like, messages, prophesizing, preaching tidbits. Like, be a normal human being for once in a while. Get a hobby that's not God related, and like, be interesting. It's not that hard. We all have things we like to do. I like to read books. I like to play with Lego. I play video games. I really enjoy sci-fi movies and sci-fi books and all this kind of stuff. Those are things I'm interested in. I have interest in old cars. I have a ton of interests. It's crazy. Probably way too many. But there are things that give me opportunity to start conversation with people, right? I know about certain things. I know about music. I know about this, right? And we can have a conversation about those things. And it maybe gets us to a point in our friendship where we can actually then have a conversation about our belief system and God and all of these things, right? And so I just get so frustrated with this constant talk of like, God is always number one. Okay, yeah. If you're a Christian, I believe that he could still be number one, and you can actually be an interesting person who does other things. That's my point that I'm going to make there. Moving on. Let's talk about lust. Okay. Lust. The second poison that often threatens the purity of our hearts is lust. To lust is to crave something sexually that God has forbidden. For example, when I, as a single man, look on a woman who is not my wife, which right now means every woman, and immorally fantasize about her, I'm lusting. I'm setting my heart on something God has placed off limits. Sexual desire within marriage is natural and appropriate, and an appropriate expression of sexuality. After all, God gave us sex drives, but God also gives us specific commands forbidding us to indulge in those desires before we marry. This is my issue with that last little bit. Sexual desire inside of marriage is normal, but sexual desire outside of marriage is not. Again, it's this light switch idea, right? Of you flip it on and off. Okay, so when you're not married, it's flipped off. Sex equal bad, and some people will say it's not. You can't generalize it quite like that. I'm going to. Okay, I'm going to. Sex equal bad, right? We don't do sex because we're not married. Get married, put a ring on it, sign a piece of paper legally saying we're married. Light switch turns on. We're good to go. Brain doesn't work that way. Humanity doesn't work that way. He's ignoring, again, what our bodies are saying. He's shoving those things deep down, right? He's saying, we don't touch them. Like, those are the no-nos, right? He's telling us to ignore the things that our body is telling us. And in addition to that, we have to repent of feeling that way. We have to repent of having sexual attraction towards somebody, right? Because it's sinful. It's wrong. Here's what else I want to talk about with the lust thing. He attributes lust specifically to being like a sexual thing, right? As being this like uber strong like desire, right? To crave something. And, but people could also say like, I lust after ice cream. Like, right, I'm craving ice cream like so bad. And so my question really is like, is lust really all that bad? Or is it what we do with lust that is bad? And maybe as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking to myself like, maybe lust is bad because maybe lust is a bigger version or a stronger version of just attraction or wanting, right? I can want somebody sexually. I can find somebody sexually attractive, right? I can want a bowl of ice cream. How do I act on that, right? And maybe lust is more of the like, I fantasize about it. I can't get them out of my mind, right? And it leads itself into infatuation, which can be a negative type of thing. I don't know. You let me know. Is lust good, bad? Let me know. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about self-pity. So this is the last pollutant of the heart. In a sense, self-pity is the worship of our circumstances. When we indulge in feeling sorry for ourselves, we turn our focus from God, His goodness, His justice, His ability to save in any circumstance. And when we turn away from God, we cut ourselves off from our only source of hope. We can easily allow self-pity to seep into our hearts when we feel lonely or crave someone to love and be loved by. It seems we have every reason in the world to complain, to sulk angrily because we've received a bum deal. I just put this in my notes. I said, quit feeling bad about yourself, man. Don't you know that God died on the cross for you? And that should be enough. Self-pity it's an interesting one because I think that it's one thing to wallow in it for a long period of time, right? And to be like, oh, woe is me, and I never get a boyfriend, or I never have a girlfriend, or I never da, right? Woe is me, right? To exist in that is probably detrimental. I would agree with that. But I would also argue that, like, there is a level to which it's, like, okay to sometimes feel sad, right? It's okay to sometimes be like, man, I really just wish I had somebody to hug. I really wish I had someone to cuddle with at night. I really wish I had somebody to go to the movies with, to go to date night with, to take to this restaurant that I really love, to do all these things that I enjoy, right? It's okay to feel that way because that's normal, right? We crave connection. We're human. So I'm going to leave it at that. We have one more chapter to get through. We are now on to chapter 11, so our final chapter. It's called You Don't Date, ? What Are You Nuts? And subtitle is What Do You Do When People Ask Why You Don't Play the Dating Game? Now, I'm going to jump pretty much into the middle of this chapter because he kind of says the same thing over and over and over again. And so I'm going to jump to what he labels the Sunday afternoon dilemma. And it's basically this story that after church, this boy named Paul is hanging out with his friends, and they all are like, hey, we're going to go do this thing. You know, we can give you a ride. And this girl at church is like, yeah, like I can give you a ride. We'll go back to my house, get changed. We can, eat something quick, and then we'll go do whatever kind of a thing. And Paul's really uncomfortable because he knows that this girl, her mom works on Sunday, so nobody's going to be at the house. And he also knows that this girl is kind of into him. And rather than communicate that he's just like, oh, like, no, like, or figure out a ride with somebody else, like, he just kind of runs away from the situation. He uses his parents' scapegoat to kind of be like, oh, well, like, my parents really like when I'm at home on Sundays and, like, all this stuff. And so he denies himself the fun of, like, going out with his friends because he doesn't want to deal with this awkward situation with this girl that he doesn't have romantic feelings for, but he knows she does. And also puts him in a compromising position. And I wrote in my notes, I was like, I really wish that he would have talked. I wish that Josh would have said, no, it's okay to communicate. And I understand not wanting to hurt someone's feelings, but it's also okay to communicate that you're not very comfortable in that situation, right? Or you don't want to do that, or you want to figure out a different ride situation, or maybe you meet up with them later, or whatever. He just encourages them to run away. And so even if that is your boundary, right, we talked about, like, listening to your body and what your body is telling you. And, like, if your body is telling you you don't want to do this, like, you don't want to do it, right? Or you want to figure out a different path. I'm guilty of this too. Like, my parents told me that I could use them always as the scapegoat. If I didn't want to do something at a friend's house, I could always be like, oh, well, my parents need me at home, because sometimes it was easier to say that than to say, like, I just don't want to hang out with you. Because that was sometimes the reality too, or I don't want to do this thing. I had one particular set of friends where their parents made us do chores at their house, which I thought was kind of bullshit. So I hated going to their house for that reason. And so I would always figure out a way to show up late and not have to do anything. And I could use my parents as a scapegoat for that. But, like, looking back on it, I'm like, I do wish that there were circumstances in which I had been more forced to kind of be honest about the way I felt about things, right? And be able to say, like, in this circumstance, be able to tell this girl, hey, I don't really feel comfortable, like, going to your house. Maybe a couple more people could come with us, that kind of a thing. Turn the scenario into something else. Or just say, hey, look, I'm not really comfortable with that. I'll just catch up with you guys next week or something like that. But stick up for yourself as opposed to kind of using your parent as a scapegoat. I think it would have been a cool learning opportunity. This last section of this chapter is called Running Out of Excuses, right? And so he's talking about there's only so many times you can kind of, like, basically lie about, like, not going on a date or all these things, right? Because this whole chapter is about these awkward situations, right? Of you've decided not to date at this point. And, people are going to ask you, why don't you date somebody? Why don't you have, for me, it would have been, why don't you have a girlfriend already? And all these things, right? And it's like, oh, well, I've decided not to. I always just said, I just haven't met the right person yet. But one of the things that Josh kind of advocates for here at the end of the book is sometimes communicating our beliefs on dating, or his beliefs on dating, to somebody, right? And he says this: our primary purpose for communicating with others should be their encouragement and their growth. And so throughout this chapter, he gave all these scenarios, and he talked about, sometimes you need to explain to this person, like, I don't date for these reasons, X, Y, Z. Other times you just kind of come up with more of an excuse of, I don't do this, or I don't do that, or I just, like I said, I haven't met the right person, kind of a thing. He then goes on later in this to talk about an example from his own life, where he said, I once made plans to go to a movie with a group of friends. At the last minute, everyone backed out except for one girl. But because she knew me and that I avoided one-on-one dates with girls, she called to say we needed to reschedule. Her feelings weren't hurt, and I didn't have to go into major explanation. She respected and worked with my beliefs. So at this point, he's advocating for, my friends all know I don't date. They know my structure. They know my boundaries, all these types of things. Well, I think it's kind of stupid in that Josh canceled plans with a group, because, like, he just doesn't do one-on-one dates. Like, I do think it is important that if you do decide, like, your dating rules, that your friends understand what those are, right? So they're not encouraging you to go down a path that you're not comfortable with, right? They're not telling you to hook up with somebody. They're not telling you to make out with somebody. They're not telling you to do this, that, or the other with somebody if that's not within, like, your group. But again, this is just movies. This is just hanging out. It goes back to Josh can't handle a situation in which, like, someone of the opposite sex and himself are alone, even though they're not alone. They're at a movie theater where other people exist. And I know they don't know that, these other people in this scenario don't necessarily know them. And so if they did start making out, or they did, people wouldn't probably bat an eye at it. They'd think it's normal. But I again find it so weird in this book that Josh, throughout this whole last segment of this book, he keeps talking about, you can be friends with the opposite sex, you can do all these things with the opposite sex, but then anytime that there's an opportunity to do that, he, like, shuts it down and runs away from it. Like, I just don't get it. The last little bit of this book, he talks about the key motivation for communicating our beliefs about dating should be to serve others. We want to promote peace, love, and righteousness that will bring glory to God. I put in my notes, like, it's kind of like the invitation to the cult. And I think one of the things that I think Josh is guilty of a lot in this book and in his own life is probably this better than thou situation of, like, creating all these rules that he follows and makes himself the golden boy by being like, I'm doing all these things and this is the godly way to be. And, like, if you don't do it this way, like, he'll kind of argue that, like, oh, well, maybe it's okay. Maybe that's okay between you and God, but that's not how I interpret God, right? And so it's like we have been set up to believe that Josh Harris is an anointed person by God to deliver this message about dating. And if we don't follow his rules to a T, we are dishonoring and going against God's plan. That's how this book is painted out to be. Because even though he won't say you're doing it wrong, he's going to heavily, heavily imply it. It's no wonder that this book caused so much pain in the fucking Christian dating world. Because, like, imagine being 14 and reading this book, being given this book, okay? Being told, hey, read this book on dating. And you open it up and you read it, and it reads as if this man is the authority on this subject, as if he has years and years and years of training and knowledge and experience among these things. And so, he's the guy. He's the guy we trust, all these things. And so you set yourself up to do exactly what this book says, to follow all of the rules, right? To remove the pollutants of your heart, to follow the standards, right? And all these things. And, like, and then it's just not fun. it's just not good, because you end up hating yourself. You end up feeling shame and guilt for any time you get it wrong. You feel disconnected from your body, right? Because you've been taught to not listen to your body. This book is brutal, I have to say. This book has been brutal to read and to relive and to think through some of these things. And I'm so happy that I'm a healthier person, but I know that I'm not a perfectly healthy person. But I look at this and I read this and I'm like blown away that so many parents just willingly handed this over to their child and said, here. And those kids read this book and they implemented these things. And these parents walked away, wiping their hands of having to have the sex talk, of having to have any conversations about relationships with their kids, and thinking, I did the right thing. When in reality, you set your kids up to fail. You set your kids up to be ashamed of themselves, to be ashamed of their bodies, to not know what actual healthy relationships look like. And so it's just brutal. Like it just is. And the fact that it's still even happening to this day. I know this book isn't in current print, but like these teachings are things that continually play out in the homeschool world and the Christian world. Like we are seeing them with young people today, and we need to push back. We need to help change the trajectory of what that is. So that's all I'm going to say on this section of the book. I hope you stuck with me. I know it was long. I know I went all over the place with this one, but we're almost there. We got one more section left to go. The next part of this book, I think, is the marriage section. It's called Now What? And it's going to talk on those final steps, right? Knowing that it's time. You're ready to get married. And so, yeah, I hope this series, I don't know. It's my opinions. It's some dude on the internet's opinions on this book, with having my own life experience now and exiting purity culture and exiting religion. And so, I don't know. I hope it was helpful. If you've got questions, if you got comments, if you got concerns, if you got pushback on any of this stuff, you can comment it down below or shoot me an email, exhsclub@gmail.com. Shoot me a DM, exhsclub on TikTok, Instagram. Threads now has a DM feature, so those are the places I'm most active for this. But yeah, all that's going to be linked down in the show notes as well. The stuff that is in this book, the brainwashing that took place, it doesn't just go away overnight, okay? It takes years and years and years of working really hard to get rid of it. I hope we can change that in the future. I hope we can open up the conversation around these topics, around dating, to be more inclusive and less rule followy, and less of like, this is the perfect way to do it, and more of, we're humans, we're gonna mess up, right? We're gonna do things wrong, we're gonna get hurt along the way, we're gonna hurt people along the way. It's what we do with all of that, and how we move forward from that defines who we are as people. So with that, I'm gonna let you go. I hope you enjoyed. Like, subscribe, do all of the internet things you know how to do, and I'll see you next time. All right, peace.